Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're getting into the new Darkhold miniseries, which teases the return of Chthon with the recent discovery of the true Darkhold, which has now unlocked the possibility of Chthon coming back to Earth in his full power and full glory. And I'm just here to see if it's really gonna happen this time. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch your spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so right away with the way that this starts off, we begin in the underground city of Abysmia. And with Abysmia, like back in the early 1940s, this was set up to be like your underground, highly technologically advanced city, or really more so kingdom, that was built under the United States by early European settlers. But also back at this time, in the days of when industrial accidents would give you powers, you had then had the case of Daniel Rose, who was like the sole survivor when a mine collapsed, and due to strange gases leaking in, he got super strength. But with him going under the identity of Rockman, he had eventually fled the surface world after the death of his family to then later become the ruler of Abysmia, but this was also used much later on to the case of where we would then find stories to where Rockman had eventually used the tools of his kingdom to help out Captain America like in World War II. But what we come to find jumping in is that someone has taken much of this technology for their own purposes, but then also that they've come here to find the true Darkhold. And real quickly we come to find out that this person was successful. But before we go further, I do want to point out that throughout Marvel Comics we have seen the true Darkhold before, but then also there's been a number of copies that were made from the true Darkhold, whether to sidestep the effect of being either controlled or transformed by the book, because there's always been this effect to where if someone reads too much of the Darkhold, then they themselves could be transformed by the spells, driven mad, or just completely controlled by Chthon. And with the Darkhold originally being a way that Chthon can make his way back, there's also said to have been a history to where other gods had also placed in their wards against him, and we'll see more of that in here shortly. But with the true Darkhold recently being discovered, it's here we then jump into this nightmare of how the near future could play out with the true Darkhold being used to release Chthon, to where in this case it's not only as like a possession with him taking over someone's body, which we do see a bit of here, but literally physically bringing him back to Earth. But also in this nightmare with us seeing things like the heroes getting overtaken and a Chthon possessed Franklin Richards killing his sister Valeria, and right away it just shows us that as soon as this invasion started, the exposure alone to Chthon and his army, it was practically useless to go up against, because quickly after, anyone who would see, smell, or hear these creatures, let alone Chthon himself, they would then be driven into madness. But then quickly we find out that this nightmare was had by Wanda Maximoff, who as we know is connected to Chthon from birth, to where at the time Chthon was trapped within Wundagore Mountain. But then it's here where we go back to Abysmia, to where we find that it's Victorious who's got her hands on the Darkhold. And with seeing her right away, we know that Doom's involved because of her dedication to both Doom and Latveria. So just by seeing her alone, you know Doom's not too far away. And I mean really the look of these particular Doom bots was a giveaway too, so I guess you can say there's also that. But with her finding the true Darkhold, she then goes to take it to Doom, but before she can make her way, she's then confronted by the Scarlet Witch. And when this happens, you do have the case to where Victorious, she does wield the power cosmic to a degree, because at one point she was given that power by Dr. Doom, and really to the point to where it's just enough to like lure out Galactus, but it's never really been on par with someone like the Silver Surfer or your classic Thanos, who also had the power cosmic. Because at the end of the day, with Victorious, she's a human who has this power, but even still she needs her staff in order to stabilize it. But with Wanda arriving here and going up against Victorious, this is ended pretty quickly, and with this happening, it's much to the surprise of Victorious, because she thought she'd win just because she wields the power cosmic. But even with that being the case, Wanda lets her know rather quickly that it's not so much about brute strength, than rather the use of experience when going up against someone. But then it's not too long after this to where then Dr. Doom shows up, and right away there's like this awkward moment because of their time together during the Children's Crusade, which was a bit of a weird story, but a good one, but still weird, because within the Children's Crusade it deals with the aftermath of House of M, to where Wanda, after the loss of her children, she had went to Dr. Doom for his help to get them back, which then led to them combining their powers and using Wanda as a Nexus being in order to control the life force itself and do so. But with Wanda getting this power, it then took over with the life force possessing her and taking her up to God level, but from that moment there was a gap in her memory up until she was sought out after by her son Wiccan and given her memory back after time traveling with Iron Lad and the Young Avengers. But during the time when Wanda had lost her memory, she had then fell in love with Doom and they were supposed to get married, but we would find out later on that he was only using her to steal her power, which he succeeded in doing for a short while when Wanda had attempted to restore all the mutants who had lost their powers during House of M. But with Wiccan reopening the portal and overcharging Doom, This had then forced Doom to forfeit the power, but in his last moments before teleporting away, and also in a sense of him pridefully needing to tell Wanda that he can handle more power than her by telling her she's only a Nexus creature, she's only a conduit, and that alone Wanda couldn't destroy the Avengers or rid the world of mutants because it was truly him all along. And a lot of this history comes back quickly within Darkhold Alpha, because with Wanda finding out that Doom has the true Darkhold, she lets him know right away that he has no idea what the true power of Chthon feels like. And she should know with her being possessed by him multiple times, and also more recently within Secret Empire, but also with Doom knowing that reading from the Darkhold directly will just drive you mad, and in a way to sidestep this, he had just been using his Doom bots and reading through them. And with hearing this, Wanda tells Doom that he's the reason why Chthon had taunted her with the nightmare of him returning from the other realm. And with the combination of Doom being capable of reading the Darkhold, along with Wanda's connection to Chthon, it's here where she tells him that they have to work together so that she can search the Darkhold for answers and stop Chthon for good, because if not, the nightmare she had is going to become a reality. And with her saying this, it's then here where Doom shows her what he's been doing with the technology of Abysmia, because along with the Abysmian technology that we had talked about earlier, these people had also created the use of a device called a vibrograph, which at the time they would use to either monitor the surface or create earthquakes, but it's here in the case of Doom to where he's repurposed the vibrograph to pierce other dimensions rather than just listen through a bunch of rocks. And with doing this, the Darkhold will act like a compass and steer the vibrograph and lead him to Chthon. But then it's here where Wanda comes to an agreement with Doom, and you know how he is with those, but then they come to an agreement to where they'll find out how to defeat Chthon by using Wanda's method, but then as far as executing the plan, they'll use Doom's method and make their way to him by use of the vibrograph. But also with going through with this agreement, they then find a story that makes mention of the Darkhold Defenders. And amongst these five, you had the Dreamer, the Fool, the Stoic, the Hunter, and the Artist. And though they were successful at pushing Chthon back into his Other Realm prison, but for them, entering Other Realm had cost them their sanity. And though Wanda suggests that they possibly do a spell to reform this team, but Doom quickly shoots down the idea because he believes that he's all five of those men put into one. And with saying this, he then just takes off and goes to Other Realm to face Chthon by himself, because in his mind and his heart, he just believes he's that guy, which is typical Dr. Doom. And don't take me wrong, sometimes he is, but this time, I got high hopes for you, Victor. We gon' see. But in any case, with Doom just up and leaving, Wanda, she then looks to Victorious, so that together with Wanda's chaos magic and Victorious having the power cosmic, which grants her cosmic awareness, and it's here where Wanda then uses this to bring in 5 different heroes in order to recreate a new version of the Darkhold Defenders. And with setting this up, she brings in Iron Man as the Dreamer, Blade as the Hunter, Wasp as the Artist, Black Bolt as the Stoic, and Spider-Man as the Fool, which is kind of messed up, like Peter deserves a little bit more respect on his name, but here we are. But with them getting here and Wanda explaining to them the threat of Chthon returning in full, and even to the point of not needing a vessel because of the true Darkhold being unearthed by Doom, which also was a thing with Carnage at one point that we talked about, as far as Chthon actually coming back, but nobody acknowledges it here, so I'm just gonna leave it alone. But then we also get the case here to where Blade suggests that they just destroy the book in order to keep Chthon from returning, but with it being made of the flesh of an Elder God, that's a bit more easier said than done. But then also with Blade making this suggestion, like there's also this thing of like, okay, so if the book is made from the flesh of an Elder God, which is, you know, Chthon's sibling, then if you can't destroy the book, then what you gonna do to Chthon? But along with that, we're also given the idea that along with Chthon being initially banished, other gods had filled his book with wards against him. And with this being the case, it hints towards the idea of the answers to stopping Chthon being within the Darkhold as well. Which again, that then brings back the idea of turning these guys into the new Darkhold Defenders. But then in order to do so, they also had to read a portion of the Darkhold, and just enough so that they can make this transformation and not completely go crazy. But with hearing the plan at this point, everybody's practically on board except for Black Bolt. And when Black Bolt gives his reasoning, which Tony translates through his suit, and it's here where he tells them that the Inhumans, they've lost a lot, which is an understatement, with them nearly being wiped out completely after death of the Inhumans, which really only left like literally a handful of the Inhumans remaining. And aside from that, you do have the exception of him helping out Doctor Strange to go up against Galactus, who was super OP after ingesting a planet that transformed him into a hybrid of extreme science and extreme magic, which also got Black Bolt killed, but he was brought back later on. But nonetheless, the reason for his hesitation, it comes from the fact of him and what's left of his people, they're still in a place of healing. And as far as he's concerned at this moment, he feels like his priority is to be with them. But then right in the middle of this, Doom comes back and he looks wrecked. But with them getting there and Black Bolt and the others asking what he saw, he doesn't tell them a thing. But even still, we get a glimpse of what happened with Doom in Other Realm, which initially was just a pile of others who had also made their way there and got destroyed. But then not long after, he was then completely overwhelmed by numbers so crazy that he barely made his way out of there. But with Doom thinking back on how Chthon's attackers had just stole on him, he lets Wanda and the others know that what he saw was for Doom's eyes only. And when he says this, Wanda, she's definitely pissed because any information he could give up could be huge in giving the others a fighting chance with them knowing anything about what they're up against. But even still, Doom, he gives up no details and he gives Victorious permission to stay with them for whatever help they may need. And just before he teleports out of there, he lets them know that Chthon had made a mistake by allowing him to leave alive, because when Chthon makes his way to Earth, Doom will be ready. But then after this, you also get this moment to where they start to reason with Black Bolt, or initially more so than reasoning, they're telling him like, hey, you gonna read this book. But some of the things that eventually convince him is the combination of him hearing the conversation of Wasp saying, if they did this to Doom, then we all need to be united going over there. And on top of that, with Blade letting him know that he's not the only person that this world has wronged, but in this moment they gotta put that aside because each one of them is needed to stop this ancient evil. But as they each go through the Darkhold and not really knowing how long to read it, or where or when exactly to stop really, because initially when they do, they kind of feel like nothing had happened. But then like seconds later, the Darkhold hit, and it was a little late, it was a little delayed, but when it hit, it was crazy. But when this happened and they underwent their transformation, immediately Wanda was like they'd read too far, and as a result, instead of us getting the Darkhold Defenders, they had become the Darkhold Defiled, which I think looks way better than what they would have turned to if they were just Darkhold Defenders, because those bodies that Doom had also saw in Other Realm, those were likely other defenders as well. And this whole mishap of these guys turning into the Darkhold Defiled, it just might turn out to be the advantage that they need to pull this off. Alright, so jumping in, one of the things that I really like about this series already is the way that it takes the existing concept of people who read the Darkhold and lose their mind from whether trying to copy over the Darkhold or reproduce a spell, augment a spell, or even just read a story from it. And for the most part, it would just show us a perspective of like the outside looking in. Because with the way that it was shown before, we would more or less just kind of see someone go crazy or see something come out the book, or they would undergo some transformation or whatever. But in this case, within this 2021 Darkhold miniseries, it's done in a way that I don't believe that we ever seen before. Because within this anthology series, we are dropped right down into the madness, and within each issue we're shown what the reader sees and what story manifested as they lost their mind. And if you ask me, this is a brilliant idea and we need a lot more of it. But jumping in with this one, we start off with Tony Stark, and in his story, it's actually narrated by Pepper Potts. And for her, very early in the beginning, she sets the stage with talking about how she was in love with her boss, but even still, she puts it out there early on that this is the story of how she died. And with how this story starts off, it begins with the moment that this Tony Stark had just came back in his first version of the Iron Man suit, just crashing into Stark Industries. And with him first getting there in this suit, of course, having an early version of the miniature arc reactor, with his last bit of strength, he plugs up the suit to charge, and that's how Pepper initially finds him. And with her just looking into his eyes through the helmet, right away she knows it's Tony and that he's in bad shape. And with Pepper and Happy seeing that this is Tony, right away they rush to get this armor off of him, but of course he was like, the chest piece stays, cause it's kinda keeping him alive right now. But as soon as he's charged up, he then just jumps back up and gets back to work in order to make improvements on his suit so that it'll be more than just armor or more than just a weapon. And with seeing him do this, Pepper, she then says the sensible thing, and she tells him like, you probably should go to a doctor because of his trauma and because of the injuries, because they would be more suited to take care of him rather than just him because he's an engineer. And really that's the most logical thing to do. But if Tony had just said okay here, then it would be like, okay, roll credits. The end. That would have been the end of the story. But when Tony responds and he tells Pepper how qualifications aren't always the best answer, and he brings up Jarvis as an example with saying how he hired a boxer to be his chauffeur, which really in hindsight that was a good decision, but that's the exception, not the rule. But more or less Tony lets them know that he had built this thing in a cave with a bunch of scraps. And now that he's back at Stark Industries, he wants to see what he can really do with this idea. And like in the case of Pepper, against her better judgment, she sticks around and she helps Tony, and even after him suggesting that everyone could just go home and take the weekend off. And with this happening, it really just leaves it down to Pepper, Jarvis, and Happy sticking around. And really it's during this time here where Tony's working on the suit and he's making his modifications and his initial updates, and Pepper's just trying to keep up as far as like the biomedical technology and machine learning, because that's not just stuff that anyone can just learn overnight. But with her sticking around and getting tossed into the company's deep classified work in robotics, there's still a good amount that she's able to pick up and lend Tony a hand throughout this process. But when this happens, there's then a moment where Tony approaches her and he removes his helmet, and right away Pepper sees that a significant amount of the scarring and bruises that were on his face, they're gone. And with showing this to her, Tony lets her know that he's practically figured out a way at this point to make this suit like a mobile hospital to where semi-autonomous computational machinery is capable of finding his injuries and just knitting him back together. And at this point, even to the extent to where the suit can probe through his body and repair his organs. And to go further and show Pepper more of an example of what the suit can do, he then tells her about how in his left hand he had like 3 metacarpal fractures, but after placing on the glove, it's all fixed. And he asks her like if she wants to see it, and in response, of course, she's like, yeah. But when he takes off the glove to show her how his hand is healed, they then come to find out that the glove had taken the majority of his skin and tissue, which wasn't quite exactly the plan. But with them seeing this, they then have to rush to put the glove back on, and as soon as they do, the suit then reacts, the anesthesics kick in, and shortly after, Tony no longer feels the pain. But even with him feeling better at this point, like Pepper, Happy, and Jarvis are just looking at him like, you know this is a problem, right? But instead, Tony just tells him that he can fix it, there's just a few bugs he's got to work out, and he explains to them that the suit must have calculated logically, and with doing so, the suit figured that if he had iron skin, it would be more protective, more durable, and more reliable. So really all he would have to do is go back in and program the suit to regenerate the skin, and after that, problem solved. And with saying this, he convinces Pepper to help him, and she agrees with it because she's in love with him, and at this point, she's really just ignoring like every red flag. And if you agree, drop a red flag in the comments for Tony right here. But at this point, like for Pepper, where they're helping Tony figure this out, and she's really able to shine with helping him with the equations, which kind of got a couple of Star Wars references in there, just saying. But for Pepper, working with Tony from that night through the next day, through the next night, and just going non-stop, and it's really got her in her feels because this is the first time she spent this much time with Tony. And for her, it causes her to get more caught up in the emotional aspects of the moment rather than the logic of what could be building up here. But while they're working here, there's then this moment to where Tony opens up to Pepper and he tells her about some of the things that had went through his mind back when he was captured and in the cave, and how it came to a point to where he didn't like himself anymore. And it was mainly because he believed that there was a strong possibility that he was going to die in there, and he didn't want his obituary to read that he was just an arms manufacturer whose life was just a service of death and profit. And for him, when he came up with the idea of this suit, in a way it kind of made it worse, because also with making his escape, he also killed every man and woman who held him hostage. And while he's talking to Pepper, he just lets her know like he wants to be a hero. He wants to save the little guy when no one else would. And when he leaves this earth, he wants to be known as someone who made this world a better place. And for Tony, he truly believes that what he can make out of this suit, that it'll be the answer for that. And when Tony says these things, it kind of creates this moment to where him and Pepper get closer, but it really doesn't go further than just a kiss, because Pepper wants them to figure out how to get Tony out of this suit completely before they start getting down. And I don't blame her, because the whole time you don't want Tony just sounding like wow, boom, wow, boom, wow, boom, you know what I'm saying? Because at that point it just would have been getting real awkward. But sometime later, Pepper then realizes that it's Sunday because Jarvis, he comes in bringing breakfast, but with Jarvis bringing breakfast up, Tony then walks in wearing the whole suit, giving off the super creepy vibe, looking like Frankenstein's monster. And with seeing this right away, Pepper hits him with the Captain Picard, like, why did you put the suit back on? And in response, Tony is then like, wait, I'm wearing the suit? And right away there, it's like, okay, drop another red flag on the play. And he tells her like he remembers the issue as far as his hand when it stopped hurting, but then when his legs and his head started hurting, he didn't notice that. In response, he started putting his helmet back on and stepping back into the legs, because to him it only felt like he was scratching an itch. And with hearing this, when Pepper goes to check on Tony's condition within the suit, she then notices that all of Tony's skin under the suit is gone. And at this point, he can't just take the suit off, because if he did, it'll kill him. And when she says this, Tony tells her in response, why would I want to take off the suit? But with him saying this, he's joking, and he tells Pepper like, well, you know, at least I still got my sense of humor. But man, even still, like, this is the worst time to be telling a joke. And really, right now in this moment, I feel like Jarvis is the only person in the room who's in their right mind, because even with just the way that he's looking at Tony, it's like, man, what the hell are you doing, bro? But right away with Tony, he tells them like, it's still me inside this suit, and he lets Pepper and Jarvis know that it's probably better that he stays in it for right now, because it's still him on the inside, and together they can figure out a way to fix this. And as a solution, he goes back to the computer and he tells Pepper and Jarvis to go downstairs and get him the regenerative preps, which he says would be better for him to eat given the circumstance. And with saying this, Pepper's like, okay, and they go downstairs, they get the preps. It takes like 15 minutes before they come back. But as soon as they get back, Tony then initiates the isolation protocol, locking Jarvis and Pepper out of the room. And when this happens, Tony says he doesn't feel so good and he needs just a moment to collect himself. So right away, Pepper then goes to check the lab scanners to scan Tony and see what's going on in the suit. But when she does this scan, she finds that the suit has probed through his body, removed his skull completely, and within this accelerated process of correcting what's left of Tony inside, it's torn apart a majority of his physical stature, it's run wires deeper into his brain, and all she could really recognize of Tony inside the suit is just a bunch of undifferentiated meat. And when she tells all of this to Tony, he just responds like, it's fine. Like, that sounds fine to me. And immediately he just starts justifying all of it, like the iron skull is safer, it's better, it's stronger, because this entire time the semi-autonomous computational machinery, it's been weaving its way closer and closer into Tony's mind and his body, to where things like he mentioned earlier, with him not liking himself back in the cave, and him wanting to be better, and him wanting to make this suit something safer and more advanced, that this has resulted in the suit blending with Tony to the point of where he doesn't know where he ends and this suit begins. But while he's in here, he tells Pepper that he needs to work, but then immediately after, he places the building under shutdown, he cuts the phone lines, and he opens the door for a moment to let in Happy and Jarvis. But as soon as they walk in, he closes it back, and after they're in, he then cuts on the fire suppression system, cutting off their oxygen, causing them to pass out, and he just snatches them up. And when he takes them in, it's here where we see what Tony meant when he said I need to work, because it's here where he has other versions of the suit printed out, and he just takes Happy and Jarvis and he throws them both into their own different versions of the suit. And as soon as they're getting stuffed in, their bodies are being broken down, their bones are cracking, and just moments later, Happy and Jarvis then start to get up. And in the case of Pepper, to where she sees all of this because she's able to go up to Tony's penthouse and get a better look, with the way up to Tony's penthouse being open and only one monitor on and available, which right away lets her know that Tony wanted her to see this. But as she looks out the window down on the street, Tony has other suits that are outside, which are soliciting for people to step into them so that they can be cured from diseases, or if like you're walking with a cane, it'll make those corrections, because for Tony, the next step at this point is to make as many of these suits as he can in order to correct the flawed human body, which ultimately he wants to do for the entire world. But of course, as of now, he doesn't have too many of them, but with him taking in Happy and Jarvis, he now has them helping him to make more. But when Pepper sees one of these suits down on the street just calling for people to climb inside, she throws down a chair from the penthouse and it just lands right on top of this thing. And might I say, like, with her making that hit, like, her sight and her aim are impeccable. Like, she need to unlock a trophy for that thing. Achievement unlocked. But even with her destroying this one suit, more of these suits then begin to make their way outside, and down on the ground, people are fighting each other just to get inside of these suits. But then as soon as they get inside, then you hear the screaming. But that screaming is then soon turned to silence one by one after each accelerated process is complete. And as soon as each one completes, one by one, they then just go into silence. But while Pepper's up here, it isn't long before Tony makes his way up to the penthouse. And as soon as Pepper hears sounding footsteps coming up behind her, she knows that it's Tony, and in a moment of just complete terror, she knows this thing's about to be over. And it's almost like, man, what's worse, like what you know is about to happen, or the terror leading up to that point? But soon after, we then see that Tony takes Pepper down to the lab, to where we find out that he has a suit specially made for her. And it's with seeing this concludes like the interpretation of the story that Tony had read. And man, was this good. Like, I really enjoyed it. And at this point, I can't wait to see everybody else go out of their mind. Alright, so initially when we jump into Blade's story, we start off with Amadeus Cho, who is not the totally awesome Hulk that we remembered him to be. But instead, in this story, in this world, he's a vampire, and we just jump right in with him being chased by a bunch of other guys who are mostly vampires as far as everyone in this group, but they pretty much chase Amadeus into a dead end after trying to get Amadeus to come back and work for the Kingpin, who is also a vampire, but we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But with these kids chasing Amadeus into this corner, right, Blade, he just pops up and he cuts one of these guys in half. And so now from here, to kind of just set the stage for this story that Blade is envisioning, if you will. Like, this story takes place 2 years in the future, after Deacon Frost offered himself as a host to the ancient blood god Lamagra. But this time around, and unlike the old Blade movie in 1998, which is still a classic, but this time around when Deacon Frost brought back Lamagra, he was annihilated and he unleashed the V-Wave, which instantly turned billions of humans around the world into vampires. But with this happening, of course, in the parts of the world that were daytime, those people who were turned into those vampires there, they were just immediately destroyed by the sunlight. And as far as every superhuman, there was no more of that, no more superpowers. No more mutants, no more Inhumans, no more Eternals, and for everyone on the planet, and by random selection, everyone was either turned completely human or into a vampire. But aside from this, all AIs were completely wiped, all the gods were banished, and there's kind of this lingering mystery of Lamagra taking control of Blade since Deacon Frost was annihilated in the ritual. And one of the reasons why this is even in question is because with Blade, he's not only out there just slaughtering every vampire he can find, but on top of that, there's rumors of him killing humans too. But with Blade just slashing through these guys who are chasing down Cho, he's kinda just stuck in this alley with nowhere to run and nowhere near a fighting chance of surviving an encounter with Blade. But before Blade can get him, Amadeus gets snatched up, and it's from here where we see Amadeus explaining things to his abductors, and with doing so it gives us a bit more context. Because for him, he was taken in by Wilson Fisk, to whom after V-Day, Wilson Fisk had pretty much become the vampire king of New York. And with him taking in Amadeus, he made Amadeus work on his tech in exchange for blood. But with Amadeus putting together so many things for Wilson Fisk post V-Day, he pretty much knows the ins and outs of everything that Fisk is working on. Because for Fisk, at this point, he's been able to gain a lot of followers, because with Blade running about, killing everything left and right, Fisk is able to offer them protection in exchange for unwavering servitude. So for Fisk, Blade's killing spree has been pretty much good for business, with everyone being terrified whether they're a vampire or not. But Amadeus then goes on to explain, like in the case of Blade, with him going on this killing spree, that it's possible that he's running low on a serum, since medicine is no longer a priority in this post V-Day world. But Amadeus also has this theory that since V-Day, Blade has just been running through his serum faster than he should, which in that case then leads towards the theory of him being taken over by Lamagra, which is something that you only can really tell by looking a vampire in the eyes. But Blade always wears shades, so nobody really knows, because if his eyes were pink, then that would be like a regular vampire thing, which for Blade that would be like a sign of his hunger just taking over. But if Lamagra was in control, then his eyes would glow red. But again, Blade always wears shades, so nobody really knows. But it's here where Amadeus tells these guys like he does know what Fisk is up to, because Fisk has a cure for vampirism altogether, and Amadeus knows because it was encrypted by him. But Wilson Fisk wants to leverage this cure so that the vampires across the world will work for him and have them all come together to take down Blade. And in the case of Blade, for better or for worse, he's after Fisk for this cure to either stop this threat to save the world and bring back humanity, or to stop this threat and take over himself. But then it's also here where we see who Amadeus has been talking to this whole time, which as it turns out is a trio that calls himself the Last Avengers, with it being Silver Sable, the Prowler, and Citizen V. To where in the case of Citizen V, we'll learn quite a bit more about this guy in a little bit. But from here, they pretty much put together this plan to have Amadeus go back to Fisk Tower so that he can find a way to let the Last Avengers in. Because with them now knowing that Fisk has a cure that could practically bring humanity back to what it used to be, or at least some version of that. But even with Cho running away, he's able to get right back in by scanning his tattoo, which is usually a glyph that is just for familiars, who are usually like vampire interns, but when it comes to those who are already vampires, they wouldn't be able to get tattoos because they would just heal up unless you use a silver needle. But Amadeus is able to use this method to get right back in, plus he designed the scanners in the first place, so there's that too. And in the case of the Last Avengers, he has them make their way in and up an elevator shaft to more or less get around the security that Amadeus had designed after updating things for Fisk as well. But with Amadeus having been here before, he had initially learned that the elevator was broken when Fisk had hung him over the ledge, threatening to drop him for like 30 seconds. And in the vampire world, nobody really cared to fix it, so because of that, it pretty much gave the Last Avengers a straight shot from the bottom to the top. But also at this time, we find that Blade has made his way in by using the severed hand of that familiar who we'd seen earlier chasing Amadeus Cho. But then it's here where we go back to Amadeus, who at this point has made his way to Wilson Fisk, and right away Wilson Fisk, he looked just like Pearl from the Blade movie. Like, since V-Day, this guy ain't been missing no meals. Like, how you a vampire with high blood pressure? Like, what we doing? But while Cho is here, Fisk tells him with what seems to be a bit of a sly remark as far as Fisk knowing what's kind of going on here in the background, because we then get this moment where Fisk tells Amadeus that he had to buy a new elevator while Amadeus was gone. And as soon as he says this, right away we find that the last Avengers, they've been caught. Because as soon as they look down and they see Count Chocula and friends heading up the elevator shaft after them at full speed, and it's quickly after this where we lose Silver Sable, who jumps down, sacrificing herself in order to buy the Prowler and Citizen V more time. But then after this, Blade, he's also made his way up top, and when he gets there, he sends aerosolized silver through the vents, but Amadeus is able to avoid it by making a quick break for the bathroom. But in the case of Wilson Fisk, who's not going anywhere without cutting the tower in half to get him out, but for him, he just lays there acknowledging that Blade's finally done it, that Blade's finally got him. Even though it's done in a way that's not so noble. But then it's also here with the last Avengers, then get cut down to the last Avenger when we find out that the whole time Prowler has been a vampire when the aerosolized silver gets to him too and he goes up in flames. But after this, when we see Blade catch up with Amadeus, it's really at this point to where we still have like the lingering mystery that more or less has two parts to it. Because on one hand, there's still the question of Blade if it's actually him or if he's been taken over by La Magra. But then also there's a question to where regardless if this is Blade or not, what is he gonna do with Amadeus Cho? Like, is he gonna kill him? Is he gonna let him live? Because at this point, either Blade or La Magra, either one could go either way. Because La Magra could just kill him and take over after Fisk, or La Magra could spare his life and use Amadeus much like Fisk did. Or on the flip side, this could actually be Blade and he can use Amadeus to save the world, or Blade has just ran so low on serum that he's out of his mind and he's just gonna kill Amadeus anyway. And at this point, Amadeus has no clue which way it's gonna go. But before Blade can make his way to Amadeus, Citizen V then cuts in and right away there's a sword fight in the bathroom. But while this is going on, Citizen V, he's telling Blade to fight the demon, fight La Magra, because Citizen V, he believes that he's already been taken by this demon. But for us, like, we really don't know yet. But for Blade, or whoever's in control, while he's fighting Citizen V, he notices that this guy has talent, but even still, he's just not able to keep up because this guy is human. And it's here where Blade punches Citizen V's mask off to where we find out that Citizen V is actually Kurt Wagner, who was formerly known as Nightcrawler, which right away explains the great swordsman skills. But in the case of what the V standing for, it was more or less the team making jokes about Kirk's accent, but it's also here where Kirk explains more or less how things had went down in Krakoa after V-Day, which for the mutants was the second time that dark magic had just taken their power on a massive scale. But in Krakoa, when the V-Wave hit and half the mutants were turned vampires and the other half were turned human, and the feast just broke out almost immediately. But for Kurt, at the time, he literally had seconds to make a decision, to where when he did, he teleported out to sea, and that was the only reason he made it out alive. But also, like, and I'm only thinking about this like right this second, but with everybody across the world turning either vampire or human, it also makes me wonder, like, did Krakoa itself turn into a vampire or a human? Because either way, I would just love to see that. But my guess is, like, with the way that this is all laid out, that Krakoa had just turned into a regular island. But for Kurt, after surviving that situation, he made his way to the mainland, he took on a new identity, and he reformed the last Avengers. But while Kirk is having this talk with Blade, Amadeus, he then tries to creep up on Blade. But right away, Amadeus is caught, and it's here where we get kind of the reveal of this whole story. Because when Amadeus gets caught, he then pleads with Blade, like, look man, we can decrypt this cure together, you gotta fight this thing, you gotta fight La Magra, because you and me, we're the good vampires. But Blade lifts up his shades and he lets Amadeus know that it's only him in there. He's not being controlled by La Magra, and as far as a cure, Blade doesn't even know what Amadeus is talking about. And he tells Amadeus that there are no good vampires, and he just throws him out the window. But with seeing things end this way, it tells us that Blade, he wasn't looking for a cure. And as far as the rumors and the theories of Blade running out of serum, that part was true, but even still, he had never fully lost control. But instead, with him looking to take down Wilson Fisk, this was him beginning to do what he felt like needed to be done for a world that has already lost, because Blade believes that the world doesn't need a protector, it needs a king. And from here forward, starting with New York with Blade taking over Fisk Tower, this story was only the beginning of him making his move forward to then take over the world. Alright, so for this one, with us getting into the Darkhold story for Janet Van Dyne, I first want to point out that for each one of these stories that we're seeing come to life in the minds of these heroes, just from reading a portion of the Darkhold, that even though these stories are being manifested from the combination of chaos magic combined with the insanity that the reader is thrown into by design, But I want you to keep in mind that these stories hold a level of truth in every case and every instance, which is essentially what makes the insanity part work. And I want to pick this apart a little bit because with these stories, throwing the heroes' minds into chaos and altering their physical appearance by throwing each of them into these dark stories that are so close to the truth, to the point of where it causes each reader to believe that at some point in time they could see themselves actually taking this path. Like Tony, for example. His Darkhold story took the truth of how he became Iron Man, with him barely making it home with his life, and it flipped the true story of his survival on its head by digging into him fearing for his life and going overboard with the Iron Man suit innovations, and even to the extent of where it costed the lives of those who were closest to him. And we can even say the same for Blade, because even though in his case the world that was crafted around his Darkhold story, like it was more of an extension of the first Blade film that had just landed in the main Marvel universe, but even in his case we got the truth of Blade's insecurities and fears of him not being sure if he just really loves killing. And with that being the case, and the whole mystery in that story of whether he was Lamagra or not, it also just shows us that Blade, he struggles with the idea of if he didn't have his serum to keep the thirst at bay, then no one would know the difference between who he truly is and a monstrous blood god. Because if certain circumstances aligned and the majority of the people of Earth were turned to vampires, he can already see himself, much like Lamagra, carving a path to taking over the world because he believes that it needs his leadership. And for both Tony and Blade, you can kind of see how these Darkhold stories are driving them mad, because in a way it's almost like the book is telling them, like, let me know or tell me with a straight face that you wouldn't become this or you wouldn't do that if a couple things had played out differently. Because we create our identities from the things we've done and the places we've been, but if our past or that story changes or that truth changes, then we're just likely to transform into something completely different as well. Because again, often we create our identities from our experiences. And so for this one with Janet Van Dyne, her story mainly focuses on the experience of her abusive marriage with Hank Pym. And with the way that this is done, it starts off before we had actually seen the abuse turn physical back in Avengers issue 213. But also it takes place after Janet had become the Wasp and her and Hank got married, which is really when she got a closer look at a lot of his toxic traits, like him often not wearing his ring, which he says is more of a safety thing with him needing to take it off in the lab, but aside from that he would often ignore her and then lash out at the start of nearly every conversation. But this really starts to pick up when the Avengers respond to Kang the Conqueror breaking into a museum, which we find out is in order to steal an artifact from ancient Egypt that holds more of a sentimental value to Kang from his time there. And when this happens, Kang, he overthrows the Avengers for the most part by just taking over Iron Man's suit and using Tony to attack the other Avengers and catch them all off guard. And after using Tony to attack the Avengers, he just shuts Iron Man down. But before he can get to what he came for, he's then attacked by Janet. And when this happens, it sparks a bit of an interesting conversation, because with Kang, of course, knowing the Avengers, he brings up Janet's relationship with Hank Pym and he more or less calls her out. And the way that he does this, it's like he lets her know, like, hey, you're out here being real aggressive. Like, could that be because there's some issues within the marriage? Which at this point for Janet, there definitely is. But for the most part for Janet, right now it's just putting up with Hank's mood swings, or him just yelling, or just locking himself away in the lab for hours. But even still, you can tell Kang knows what he's doing by even bringing it up. But then for Janet, with her telling Kang more or less that he's just a villain and he don't know nothing about feelings, but Kang lets her know, au contraire. Because back during his time in Egypt, there was a woman who he was deeply in love with, and he lets Janet know that she reminds him of her, with her being filled of so much sorrow, which for Kang filled him with delight because he knew that only he could take care of her. And when saying this, Kang then asks Janet, is there someone taking care of you, just before he leaves? And you can tell when this happens that it leaves this thought in Janet's mind, which had really already been there at this point, but it agitates the idea for Janet that she simply just deserves better. Because even at this time when Hank was spending ridiculous hours in the lab, which aside from him improving his equipment, most of this time spent back then was him trying to make something better because he felt like he hadn't done anything significant since his discovery of Pym particles. And early on, this is something that we would see a lot, with Hank just disappearing and quote unquote abandoning the team in order to work on his next breakthrough, which is exactly what led us to getting Ultron in the first place. But in this case with this Darkhold story, for the most part it's dealing with events that had taken place during and after Avengers issue 181, when the National Security Council had sent out Henry Peter Gyrich to downsize the Avengers to only 7 members. And really this had happened because prior to this, the government would just let the Avengers slide because they're the heroes, but with the number of incidents piling up and the roster growing super huge, over time they just couldn't keep track. But also with this selection, the National Security Council, they picked the 7 heroes who would remain Avengers off of their uniqueness and special abilities, established loyalties, and other guidelines that just fell under government regulations. But within this selection, they picked Iron Man, the Vision, Captain America, Scarlet Witch, Beast, the Wasp, and Falcon. And in the case of Falcon, I believe it was a thing at the time to where the council had kind of shoved him in there for diversity purposes. But I wanted to point this out to kind of set the stage a bit better, because at the time of this story, Janet is effectively still an Avenger, but Hank isn't. And it's not like before when he would just leave when he wanted to, he was cut from the roster. And even though he initially told her that he didn't mind the switch up, but not too long after his actions would show differently, with him expressing resentment and taking that out on Janet. But at the time he was trying to cover it up by just saying that he could use the extra time in the lab. But it's also during this time within the Darkhold version of the story, to where Janet recalls Hank's mood swings, his over dedication to his work, to where at that time she even suggested that they take a vacation together, but he shot that idea down. But even after, with them getting back into a regular conversation, he'd quickly get frustrated and push her away. But then after this, it's here where we then jump forward again, after a point to where the government had allowed Hank Pym to join back with the Avengers, and it's during this time where they're celebrating at the Avengers mansion, with Hank coming back to the team, and it's here where we see Janet have a conversation with Pepper, who initially just asked Janet like how are her and Hank doing, and Janet lets her know like, you know, things could be better, and Pepper's more or less like, well, yeah, that's marriage. But then it's here where Pepper makes the suggestion to Janet that her and Hank should go on a vacation, take some time away, before things pick up and Hank is fully back into action. And Janet lets her know she suggested a trip, but Hank had just shut the whole idea down. But then when Pepper tells Janet that she should do something for herself at the very least, because if not, who else is going to take care of you? And it's right there where Janet immediately remembers her conversation with Kang. And here we jump forward some time with us also seeing Janet thinking about Hank's behavior and how in moments when he couldn't own up to something, he would then just blame it on her. But then also with this montage of Janet's thoughts, which looks back and then goes forward into an upcoming event after Hank had rejoined the Avengers, which had taken place within Avengers issue 212, where at the time a warrior by the name of Gorn of Belusia had been killed by 2 police officers. And after his death, Linnea, the Elf Queen, she had then just went on a rampage in order to make the world pay for her loss. But also when this happened and the Avengers responded, it came down to a moment where Captain America avoided her magic and he positioned himself right behind her in the perfect place to attack. But for Captain America, by not attacking, he was trying to show her that he wanted to talk the situation out. But it was also in this moment when the Elf Queen had her back turned and Hank Pym had hit her with his bioelectrical sting, which barely phased her. But right after this happened, before she could drop a vehicle on Hank's head, Janet had then came through and saved him, and Hank at the time was pissed. He was like, why her? But this is the event that's pretty much referenced as we go back into Janet's Darkhold story, and it's here where we pick up after this when Hank had a meeting with the Avengers when he was reprimanded and informed by Thor that under the charges that Captain America had brought up, Hank Pym would later face a court-martial. But also while this meeting is going on, Janet is just outside, and in a very similar way to Avengers issue 213, we see a conversation take place here between Tigra and Janet. But though it's laid out pretty much the same way, the conversation in this Darkhold story, it plays out a bit different, because starting here with Janet, she's waiting right outside, she's nervous, and she's kind of taking this in and asking herself like, when will you wake up? And when she says this out loud, Tigra overhears her. But long story short, it pretty much leads into this conversation of Tigra checking on Janet, and Janet opens up. She admits that it's a tough situation and she is disappointed. But also when them talking here and Tigra being fairly new to the Avengers roster, like she doesn't know Hank too well, so she's not really acquainted with the red flags. But while she's talking to Janet here, she lets Janet know like she couldn't imagine what it's like being married to a superhero. But at one point in time for Tigra, she was married to a cop, and though they didn't see eye to eye on a number of things, they always had each other's backs. But with saying this, Tigra lets Janet know that when she was with her husband that there was also no fear, because she doesn't believe that fear has a place in marriage. And in this moment she's worried that Janet's afraid. And as soon as Tigra says this, Hank comes storming out, and it's here we see Janet asking him what happened. And much like before, Hank snatches his arm and tells Janet to leave him alone. But this time when Hank gives Janet the news, telling her what Cap, Thor, and Iron Man said as far as Hank getting ready to be court-martialed, and it's here where Hank holds Janet and he tells her, I am afraid. So where right in that moment, Janet just looks over Hank's shoulder at Tigra and Janet says nothing, which is quite the departure from Avengers issue 213 when Janet did respond when she had pretty much lied and told Hank that she doesn't care, she's not afraid, and she gave Hank words of comfort telling him to hold her. And with the Janet of this story just veering further and further from the path from the classic Janet who just kept turning the other cheek, and it's here where we come to the part that's leading to the infamous moment when Janet gets up in the middle of the night to head down to the lab and check on on Hank, who at this point was salvaging components from Ultron to place in his new creation, Salvation 1, which in this case was made out of all adamantium, but it was designed to detect and attack the Avengers so that Hank can swoop in and save the day and hopefully save his career, because he had also built into it a secret weak spot that only he knew about. And for the most part, this scene or this moment, it plays out the same, because when she flies down, she's detected on her way in, and much like before, Hank accuses her of spying on him. But in this case, with Salvation 1 being much earlier in its development, we pretty much skipped the whole part of Hank making the robot attack Janet in order to see how effective it is. But in her story, it continues with a portion of her trying to talk him out of it and him attacking her in response. And it's right here for Janet where the darkness just takes over, because when Janet sees her hand with the broken shards of glass in it, she then grabs a larger piece of glass and her eyes then turn red. And it's almost as if here when this happens that she goes into stinger mode, as if the biological modifications that Hank had given her back when she first became the Wasp and she got her wings, and it's like in this story that true Wasp, to where in the case a female Wasp can sting multiple times, had more or less come to the surface and really a lot like an actual Queen Wasp that would only sting and do multiple stings in an act of self-defense. And with how this is done, it's almost like this entire time, like Janet has been going against her nature all the way up to this moment, which was pretty much her breaking point. And after she kills Hank, it's then in this moment when she truly feels free. And it's like for Janet, in this moment you can tell like this is the part of the Darkhold story where the book is more or less tugging on her and it's causing her to look at herself and answer the question of like, if this had actually played out this way, how would you honestly feel? And I wouldn't be surprised if she actually did want to kill him at times. And now with her reading and experiencing this story, that's likely the part that's driving her crazy, because she knows had a few small things played out slightly different, then truth be told, she could have seen herself doing this. Alright, so with how this story starts off, Black Bolt finds himself with partial memories, with him not knowing where he's at or what event brought him to this place. But with him looking around and finding himself outside of the royal palace, and he looks around and he recognizes the terrain and he realizes that he's on the nearby moon, Taros. But even with him looking around and coming to this realization, he's still asking himself like, okay, well like how did I get here? And it's something he needs to figure out pretty quick, because as long as he's here, his throne sits empty. And with him trying to recall the prior events, it's here where a part of a memory comes back to him. And the first thing he remembers is being approached by Telegar, the royal physician, because Telegar had approached him earlier, warning him that Maximus had came to Telegar some time before to get his help in planning a coup against the throne. But with hearing this, Black Bolt, he totally believes it, because that's what Maximus does, or he used to do. But Telegar also tells Black Bolt that he refused to help Maximus, but even still that doesn't mean that Maximus isn't gonna go to others in order to continue with his plan. But for Black Bolt, with him remembering just this portion in this moment, it still leaves him with the question like, okay, if Maximus did set him up, and Black Bolt was given a warning, then how did he still end up out here? And the first thought that comes to mind is, well, he had to have been betrayed. But nonetheless, with him being out here on Taros, he still has to deal with the dangers of the terrain, which he quickly comes across by way of the Desert Kraken. And overall, Black Bolt he's well aware of the dangers that he'll find out on Taros, because since the royal city doesn't execute, they will often exile criminals to Taros, knowing good and well that their chances of survival would be very low. But with Black Bolt being caught off guard by the Desert Kraken, he does have a bit of a moment where he gets snatched up, and he says it's a bit of a byproduct to him living a life of silence, to where for many years he's trained himself to control his voice, which could potentially shatter worlds or even kill those close to him if he accidentally uttered something, like years ago with the accident where he tragically killed his parents. But for Black Bolt, he also expresses that there's moments to where with him being silent for so long, and also him being so good at being silent, that often he'll forget that he has a voice. And it's here where he lets the Desert Kraken hear that voice, which from here just liquefies the Kraken, allowing Black Bolt to make it out alive. But after this, as Black Bolt makes his way to climb the Mountain of Survivors, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, but on his way up, he continues to remember more from earlier in his conversation with Telegar and where that it went shortly after. Because earlier, Telegar had informed Black Bolt that Maximus had wanted Telegar to perform an advanced molecular surgery to change his appearance, in order to make Maximus an exact copy of one of the ministers, which would effectively allow Maximus to make his way into the palace and pose as anyone to then take down Black Bolt and the council with no one knowing that Maximus was even there. But at this point, Telegar, he's already informed the council that he was approached by Maximus, and at this point the council, they're a bit on edge, like they're paranoid, because if Maximus had already underwent this advanced molecular surgery, he could effectively be anyone standing here in this moment. So when the minister's security is kind of like, okay, now come calm down, let's not make these accusations. And with hearing this, others on the council are looking around like, okay, yeah, that sounds like something Maximus would say. So it's like the paranoia is building quite a bit. But then it's here where we find that the scientists at the Ministry of Technology, that they've come up for a solution for this on short notice, so in the event that Maximus does make his way to the throne under the physical appearance of someone else, then they'll be able to truly identify who he is. And we come to find out that the method that they've come up with is a device called a memory detector, which in my opinion, it kind of has like your classic Reed Richards design signature written all over it, which in either case, like whether it's Fantastic Four or Inhumans, back at the time it was Jack Kirby either way, but either way it really feels to me like something Reed Richards would make. But as far as the memory detector, the way that it works, if anyone approaches it, it'll just display on this huge screen random memories so that others would know exactly who that person is. So even if Maximus turned himself into a one-to-one replica of one of the ministers, then the memory detector would just put him on blast. And with seeing this, like, I could just imagine like somebody on the council's looking at this like, man, you do not want me to walk in front of that thing. Woo! Cause you so don't want to see these memories on the big screen. Matter of fact, every time I walk by, put a disclaimer up. Viewers' discretion is advised. But if somebody would have said that, they'd have been like, yup, that's Maximus. Take him to Taros. But for Black Bolt, with him remembering up to this point as far as the memory detector, at this time as we follow his journey on Taros, and we see that he's made his climb up to the top of the Mountain of Survivors. But as far as the top of the Mountain of Survivors, which also I want to point out that Black Bolt had to climb to, with him now thinking that Maximus had did something to him, to where now Black Bolt only has part of his memories, but also the inability to fly. And even still at this point, he's not sure if that's all the way Maximus, or if it's just the atmosphere of this moon messing with him. But here at the top of the Mountain of Survivors, this is where supplies are dropped off every so often for those who can make their way up here, because it's forbidden for supply crafts to land on the surface of Taros. But amongst these supplies, Black Bolt finds a self-use burial shroud, which is made for exiles who are like on the brink of death, so that they can crawl into it and send a signal for a supply ship to come through and pick up their body. And with seeing this, Black Bolt just figures that he'll use one of these shrouds to call for a supply ship so he can make his way home. But with him sending out this signal, he sees a ship approach from the palace, but it's not a supply ship. But even still, it bears the princely insignia. So right away, Black Bolt is like, that's gotta be Maximus. He's come out here to brag, or more or less make sure that Black Bolt doesn't make it back. So when Black Bolt sees the ship, he hollers at your boy, knocking the ship out of the sky and seemingly saving the day. But then again, come on, like this is a Darkhold story, and we ain't got no happy endings yet, so why we gonna start now? But we come to find out when Black Bolt opens the ship to see who's inside, he opens it up just to find that it's Telegar. And as Black Bolt pulls him out, Telegar's just going on about how I failed you, Prince. And in this moment, Black Bolt wishes that he could speak to tell him like, no, you haven't failed me, you tried to warn me. And it's here where Telegar gives him the terrifying truth, like it just drops the bomb on him. Because it's here where Telegar tells him that he's not Black Bolt, but instead Black Bolt is actually Maximus, and that this plan has been in the works for years. And it's here where Telegar tells him that as Maximus, he had taken Telegar's family and threatened him with their lives, so that Telegar would complete the transformation. And with doing this, Maximus had Telegar tell Black Bolt a misleading version of his plan, saying that Maximus would come disguised as one of his ministers, when the plan had been for him to go in as Black Bolt all along. But after giving Maximus the physical appearance of his brother Black Bolt, it was beyond Telegar's means to give Maximus the ability of flight, but with the procedure using the Terrigen Mist, he was able to give Maximus Black Bolt's voice. So now with Maximus having the appearance and the voice of Black Bolt, the plan was nearly flawless, until they ran into the whole issue of the memory detectors. And it was then when Telegar then had to give Maximus Black Bolt's memories. But he couldn't just throw in Black Bolt's memories alongside with the memories of Maximus, because I assume the memory detectors would have had like a picture-in-picture kind of thing going on, and then his cover would have definitely been blown. So what Telegar had to do was suppress the memories of Maximus deeply and insert the memories of Black Bolt so it would seem like they were the only memories that were there. But for one, this was a very tricky procedure, with one person potentially holding 2 lifetimes of memories. Like, it already was a recipe for madness. But then also on top of that, there was the risk of Maximus not ever coming back, or even when he did, there's no telling how long that would take, whether that would be a month, a year, or a decade. But with this next part of the procedure being done, Telegar expresses that Maximus, he didn't have the training or the years of practicing and controlling his voice that Black Bolt actually had, and as a result, Maximus cried out and tore the lab down, barely giving Telegar enough time to get out of there. But with these being Telegar's more or less his last words, In this story, it leaves Black Bolt desperately uncertain of who he actually is, because at this point he could take Telegar at his word and believe that he actually is Maximus, and at any point, whether months from now or years from now, Maximus could resurface. And if that's the case, then he should never go back to his throne, because eventually he would become Maximus and Maximus would just take over. But he then thinks to himself, what if this was the plan of Maximus the whole time, to pull off this elaborate plan to where Black Bolt would truly believe that he is Maximus? Because if that's the case, then Black Bolt needs to get back as soon as possible. And there's a number of things that could sway this decision or this argument either way. Because if you think about the fact that he can't fly right now, that'll have you like, oh man, he's gotta be Maximus. But again, that could be the moon's atmosphere messing with his mind. But on the flip side, if he was Maximus, he would have accidentally made a sound earlier when he was attacked by the Desert Kraken, because Maximus lacks the training that the real Black Bolt truly has. So again, with the way that he's looking at all of this, all the information, it could go either way. And for that reason, in this moment, in this story, Black Bolt, he's not even sure about who he is. And because of that, he's just stuck here in the middle, because either decision, whether to go or to stay, either way, they could cost him everything. Alright, so for this one, as we get into the Darkhold story for Spider-Man, and we take a peek into the narrative of like what twisted Peter's mind when he read a portion of the Darkhold, and his story takes us to New York in the aftermath of an event called the Unraveling. But also as we jump into the story for Peter, he's on a phone call with his wife, Gwen Stacy. And right away, this is one of those things with these Darkhold one-shots that kind of gets me. Because like what we talked about before, with these stories getting into the hero's minds and driving them into madness, to where it then uses chaos magic to transform their bodies. And like the kicker, to me at least, is with that being the case, that these stories come from a place to where some of these thoughts had to be in the back of their mind. And granted, there was a time when Peter and Gwen Stacy did get married, though at the time it was outside of continuity, back when Marvel started initially allowing other countries to print their own translations of Spider-Man, which in some cases got completely different stories, like in Mexico for instance, when they started printing twice as frequently and throwing in a lot of different plot threads, which caused a lot of things to play out differently than the Spider-Man history that we're familiar with. And in a way, it kind of does seem like a nod to that, but also with this Darkhold story just hitting the ground running with Peter and Gwen married, and it kind of makes you think like, man, I could imagine Peter having those thoughts in the back of his mind, at least to some degree, where he'd wonder how their life would have been had she never died. And I like pieces like that get thrown in. But this story for Peter, it's so much more than just that. Because on one hand, you do have Gwen telling Peter don't be late for their anniversary, and her also telling him on his way home to pick up some vinegar, which right away gives out the vibes of like, this is what your conventional nightmare is kind of made of. Because I'm not sure if any of you have ever had this dream or this nightmare to where on one hand, it's like the end of the world, but then also while the world is ending, for whatever reason in your dream, you also got to get your homework done. And it's like, really, like if the world was really ending, who would care about homework? And that's kind of the situation we see Peter in here, because with this event called the Unraveling, which is just causing everything to fall apart, Peter finds himself webbing all over the place in an attempt to hold as much together as he can. And as far as the specifics of how this event started, we're not given a definitive reason, though early on Peter does mention that Reed Richards suggested that it might have been something dealing with the Molecule Man, but even still we don't know for sure. But instead we just dive in with Peter trying to web everything and hold it all together, but also he has to meet with his wife Gwen at 7:30. Oh, while also picking up the vinegar on the way home. I almost forgot. And I'll admit, like on the surface, it sounds pretty dumb as like an opening concept, but if you think about it, this is like the perfect analogy to Peter's craziest anxieties manifested and wrapped up into one nightmare story. Because as Spider-Man, he's always struggled with the idea of doing as much as he could as a hero, and not only with the fear or anxiety of that not being enough, but even with doing this, he's also constantly under the pressure of making sure that Peter Parker's life doesn't fall apart at the same time. So it's like already what seems to be crazy in this world, it's really and truly what Peter's been dealing with under all the layers of those quips and those jokes. And it's like we're given the visual representation of Peter having to hold everything together by himself. But along with this unraveling event that's just causing everything to unravel, like aside from us seeing Peter hold Manhattan together with his webs, we also see him going around being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. like when he comes across this guy whose jaw has pretty much unraveled from his face, and Peter goes to find it and he brings his jaw back to this guy while webbing the guy up to kind of hold him together in the meantime. But it's also kind of wild because even though this unraveling has most people kind of like in a zombie state, Peter can also tell like the guy with the missing jaw, who's also missing an arm, that he's very much still in a stage where he's aware of what's happening to him. And it's really sad to say the least. But just after this, Peter tells the guy that he's gonna go get his arm back, and this then takes us over to Peter running into Doc Ock, who in this case is very much your classic Doc Ock at his core. But then on top of that, you then have the whole unraveling thing that's going on. So for Otto, he's a bit delirious as well, because at this point when Peter gets back to him after racing back and forth throughout the city, Otto is just waving this dude's arm around, but to Otto, he truly believes that he has a whole hostage here. But as we can see, that's clearly just not the case. But with classic Otto in this condition, there's not a lot that he can do, and it's not long before he overexerts himself and he breaks his arms back off. But even still, Peter can see that Otto just needs help, on top of the fact that he's physically falling apart. And it's real brief, but it's a bit of a touching moment with Otto asking Peter not to laugh, and in response, Peter takes it seriously and he tells Otto that he won't. And Peter webs Otto back together, telling him that he'll check on him the next day. But then also with Peter seeing this flare go up from the Baxter building, like it's pretty obvious that Reed Richards is sending him a message, and Peter has to rush over to check it out and see what's going on. But as soon as Peter enters the Baxter building, like he's telling Reed like, hey, you ain't got to do the whole flare thing, like I got a phone. But when Peter goes in and he sees Reed, who at this moment is looking like Reed's soup, like the return of Inside Out boy. But then it's here where Reed expresses to Peter that it's more so of a thing of him letting go of his human morphology and then pulling himself back together so that it can help his cognitive capacity for him to continue to do his work. But even with Reed saying that, I got a feeling that a couple of screws are still kind of loose here. But even still, at this point, it's about 6:14 and Peter still has to meet his wife Gwen at 7:30. So at this point, he's not really one for the extended explanations because he wants to make sure that he gets back to his wife on time. But then also we get this moment to where Reed, he questions Peter for doing this whole anniversary thing with his wife while telling Peter that his responsibility to the city is so much greater. And it's here where Peter kind of snaps because he's been doing the most out there. And he lets Reed know like, look, I sleep 3 hours if I'm lucky. I'm out here losing weight. I weigh $129 when I'm soaking wet. And he's literally out there webbing up and holding this city together by himself, only for a few hours later for his webbing to dissolve, to where he then has to go back out there and do it all over again, while Reed is just cooped up in here putting his insides on the outside. And when this happens, like more or less, Peter, he just lets Reed know, don't talk to me about responsibility. I'll stop having dinners with my wife when you fix this damn unraveling. And I'm paraphrasing of course, but you guys kind of get where it's going. But then it's here where Reed shows Peter his recent solution for the unraveling, or at least something to help with Peter's contribution to all the chaos outside. Because for the time being, with Peter trying to web everything up and hold it together, his webbing will stay for like 3 hours before it dissolves, which for Peter is like the maximum amount of time that he'll get to sleep if he's lucky. And at this point, Peter's talked to Otto about extending the length of time that his webs could last, but like we've seen, Otto's head really isn't all together at this moment, so that's a no-go. But it's here where Reed shows Peter that he's constructed a self-healing organic polymer that can theoretically replace Peter's web fluid. But on top of that, to also help, Reed applied a special enzyme to make it adhesive, so that it'll work much like Peter's existing web fluid, but instead of it dissolving in 3 hours, this solution will hold up indefinitely. But then it's here where Peter's kind of like, okay, well, what exactly is this made of? And casually, Reed just tells him like, it's my finger. And when I seen this, I was kind of like, whoa, man, like Reed, you need to get out more, man, like that's not the move. And Peter's response more or less just wasn't too different. But with Reed showing the solution to Peter, that much how like Peter was saved from the unraveling by his healing factor, Reed was able to hold himself together because of his elastic molecular structure. And Reed tells Peter that there are others out there with this elastic molecular structure that Peter needs to find and bring to Reed, so that Reed can combine their structure with this enzyme so that all these webs will hold up and finally Peter can get some rest. But also when Reed says this, Peter then realizes why Reed has the old sonic gun out, and after having this talk, Peter immediately goes after Venom. And at this point it's like 7:04, Peter's running tight on time, and his wife Gwen calls. And at first she just lets him know like, don't forget the cider vinegar. And then she starts to say that something's wrong, but Peter doesn't pay much attention to it. He knows he got to be back by 7:30, so he's really just rushing to get this done so he can get back to his wife in time. But as far as Peter looking for Venom right now, who at this point has been missing since the beginning of the unraveling, and for reasons that we'll find out momentarily, because when Venom gets the drop on Peter down here in the sewer, he immediately destroys destroys the sonic gun, which right away takes Peter's options off the table as far as him getting this done in a quick and neat fashion. But Peter also notices that when Venom attacks him here, he's not as strong as he's used to Venom being. So right away Peter's like, okay, so Venom's either pulling his punches or Eddie's in bad shape. But with the sonic gun being broken at this point, Peter just pulls the roof down on the both of them, and with doing this he tells Eddie like, look, I need the symbiote, this is bigger than the both of us, and he lets Eddie know like he'll pry it off of him if he has to. But when Peter says this, the Venom symbiote opens up and it shows Peter that Eddie's dead, and the symbiote's been trying to hold Eddie or preserve him or keep him fresh for as long as possible, only to have Eddie still die. And with seeing this, Peter was just like, well, why didn't you just go and find another host? And the Venom symbiote tells Peter like, you don't get it, you never did. Because for the Venom symbiote, Eddie was more than just a host, because when they met each other, they were both broken. And at that time, the two of them coming together, it was like they each were the perfect solution of what the other needed to heal. And as the Venom symbiote goes on to explain to Peter on how it couldn't just leave Eddie, because Eddie was more than a host, it was his home, and there was just something about that loyalty that just struck a chord with Peter, because this love and this loyalty that the Venom symbiote had learned to where now it won't leave Eddie even after it's too late, and it more or less has Peter like, man, like you definitely didn't learn that from me. And in this moment, Peter tells the symbiote that he's sorry, and that he can be that for the Venom symbiote now, because he wasn't ready before, but Peter says that he's ready now. And when he says this, the Venom symbiote starts to reach for him, but then it stops, it says no, and it stays with Eddie. And when this happens, Peter kind of stands there for a moment, he takes it in, with him not only seeing a reflection of a moment where he had fell short, but with him also realizing that it's 7:46 and he's late for his anniversary dinner with his wife, Gwen. And when he realizes this, he then just races off. And on his way to meet his wife, he's trying to call her, but Gwen's not picking up, and even on his way, he dropped his phone to then look at the screen and see it's 7:47. But even with him rushing to see her, he's having this feeling of deja vu, to where on one hand, he kind of knows what he's going to find when he gets there, but even still, he's rushing to get to her because he's still got to try. But nonetheless, when he makes his way to Gwen, only to find that she's succumbed to the unraveling as well, and that he had gotten back to her too late. And he missed this last moment with her because he was handling too many tasks, trying to do too much, and he missed out on what could have been their last moment together. And it kind of pulls on the heartstrings here when he blows out the candle and he's kind of like, man, I forgot the side of vinegar. And it's really like a sad moment. But after this, when he goes back to the Baxter building, Peter then more or less tells himself that there is one more thing that he has to do. And it's here where we see him go back to Reed, and Reed is more or less like, okay, well, how did it go? Any problems? Any complications? And Peter's just like, nope, nothing worth mentioning. But then from here we get this moment to where Reed, he apologizes for what he said earlier about Gwen, and then Reed apologizes for questioning Peter's priorities. But while Reed is saying this, Peter's behind him looking over the notes, checking out the enzyme, and then next thing you know, he's right behind him with a needle. But it's not long after this where we next see the city covered with webbing, but this time it has a hint of blue in it, because at this point Peter has followed through with Reed's solution, but instead of taking the Venom symbiote or anyone else with an elastic molecular structure against their will, Peter had instead used Reed and applied his own molecular structure to his own plan. And even though the solution doesn't fix the unraveling, it has stopped its progression for the time being. But at this point things are better now. Doc Ock, he's back to robbing banks, thanks to Peter. And it's kind of funny seeing Doc Ock rob banks again, because that's a throwback to how he used to fund his research. But it is also here towards the end of this story to where Peter can still hear Reed Richards calling out and saying like, Peter, it hurts. Because Reed Richards is not dead, but instead he can feel himself stretched across the entire city, with him more or less becoming a type of sentient webbing that is always in pain. Alright, so after making our way through all of the crazy one-shots, where we got a close-up on all of the stories that gave the heroes enough madness to transform them into what was intended to be the Darkhold Defenders, but instead it transformed them into the Darkhold Defiled. And man, I really enjoyed these stories. And if I had to rate them from favorite to least favorite, it'd probably be Iron Man first, then Wasp, with Black Bolt and Spider-Man kind of neck and neck, and then after that I would say Blade, because I love the idea for Blade's story, but one issue alone just didn't do it justice. And let me know in the comments below like what you guys thought. Like, how would you rank these one-shots from most favorite to least favorite? Because I'm curious to know. But with this group effectively becoming the Darkhold Defiled, at this point on the other side of the door, the army of Chthon is ready for all the smoke. But in the case of the Darkhold Defiled, this team that Wanda Maximoff has put together, we quickly find out that we have a bit of a problem here. Because not only like we'd seen in the first issue, have the heroes read too far, which is what made them the Darkhold Defiled rather than the Darkhold Defenders, but with them being driven to this state, they immediately attack Wanda going after the Darkhold. But fortunately Wanda's quick enough to put the shields up before they get to her and victorious. But what we quickly find out is that with the heroes being so far gone into madness, they're just in attack mode right off the rip, and they're making threats like feeding Wanda to Chthon so that while he's splitting her soul, they can then attack Chthon and take his power. So where then likely after that they would then just attack each other until only one of them was left. But with seeing this, Wanda's gotta move quick so they can go forward with the plan. So as a result, she throws the Darkhold to Victorious, telling her to get the book to Doom. But from there, Wanda quickly turned this around, because really with these guys being driven into madness and being eager to shed blood and tear someone to pieces, and because of that, Wanda quickly binds them with the bands of Belasco, and she sends them on their way to take all that madness and that chaos to Chthon. Because here on this side, they might be mad, but over in Other Realm, they'll just fit right in. And with Wanda doing this, is more so her aiming them at the target which was intended. And when the Darkhold Defiled get to Other Realm, they put plenty of damage on Chthon's army. But again, with their madness being a factor here, they're again not only talking about turning on Wanda, but also making their way to Chthon, killing him, and taking Other Realm for themselves. Which again is really just the madness speaking. But aside from that, like the damage that these guys do out here, like with Black Bolt for instance, like they were about to say he was too weak to utter a word, or even that he was too soft, but when he finished their sentence, it quickly cleared the battlefield. But even after that, from there, other waves had come through, and again these guys were handled pretty quickly, and it kind of left the Darkhold Defiled wondering like, okay, like we've had enough of this, like where is Chthon? Because after destroying just everything in their path up to this point, there's no sign of him. But then when Spider-Man makes the assumption that Chthon is just hiding, and as soon as he says that, all of a sudden the ground starts rumbling, and from there they're immediately met by the hand from the end of the cabin in the woods. And I'm sorry, this was the first thing that came to mind, and I know I wasn't the only person who thought that. But it's here with Chthon, he makes it pretty clear that he doesn't mind showing up. He's ready to make his comeback, and he's not trying to hide from anyone. But when he lifts the team in his hand and gets ready to crush them, Black Bolt pulls down his mask, and right away Spider-Man's like, hey, like what are you thinking? A blast this close in a closed area will kill all of us. Like come whip this ninja. Because sure, they've all stepped into madness, but clearly in this moment, everybody else is like, dude, we ain't that mad. But just before they get crushed, Wasp, she grows bigger, and she makes her attempt to keep Chthon from closing his hand, and quickly she notices that she's not strong enough to keep them from getting crushed. But before you know it, this glowing ball just swoops in, releasing energy in all directions and keeping these guys from getting crushed. And as it turns out, this is the same stranger that we'd seen in the Alpha issue, who hasn't intervened up until this point. And in a little while, I'll talk a bit more about who exactly this is. But for the time being, we'll just refer to him as the Stranger. But for the time being, like when this stranger steps in, initially they're not sure if he's on their side or if he's competing for Chthon's power after they did all the heavy lifting. So you have this moment to where Blade tries to attack him, but of course that didn't pan out too well. But after this, when Chthon then shows up, he's not at all impressed or threatened for that matter by anyone here, because his main concern is getting to the door that was opened as a result of the Darkhold being unearthed in red. But when he approaches his door, he can't get through. But then through this door entering into Other Realm comes Doom and Wanda. And so now up to this point, we've kind of been given the details of the plans between Doom and Wanda rather sparingly, aside from us seeing Wanda agree with Doom to stop Chthon. But it's here pretty quickly where we find that Doom's plan all along is very much a Dr. Doom-like plan. Because with everything that he had set up with taking the technology from Abysmia and using that along with the Darkhold to find Chthon, so from there he can merge with the Darkhold and take Chthon's power, while in the meantime just using the aid of the Scarlet Witch to get him to the point to where he could do so. But at this point, with all of Wanda's experience with Chthon, and with Doom for that matter, when they get to the moment to where Doom is about to embody the Darkhold, it's here where Wanda then deviates from the plan that her and Doom had agreed to, and with doing so, she sets him ablaze. And with Wanda setting Doom on fire right here, like to me it just seemed kind of personal, because you guys know the backstory of Doom, with his mother losing her soul to Mephisto, and Doom's early attempts at combining magic with science backfiring and burning him in the same flame that consumed his mother. So when Wanda sets Doom on fire, I highly doubt it's a coincidence with her method of attack here, but also with the way that he used her during Children's Crusade, with stealing her powers to become a god, and this kind of feels like payback on a number of levels. Because when Wanda does this and she takes the Darkhold from Doom, she immediately does what Doom had planned to do with the book, and she merges with the true Darkhold right away. And the reason why Wanda is doing this is because she's learned throughout the years that she's failed at trying to destroy Chthon because he can't be destroyed, and neither can the Darkhold. But if she binds the Darkhold to her soul along with its author, this would then turn the tables, allowing her to possess him, rather than him being free or possessing Wanda once again. And that is exactly what she does by becoming the Darkhold, absorbing Chthon and all of his power, by way of her having Chthon in her possession. And so of course when this happens, Doom's like, yo, that was supposed to be me. And on top of that, the Darkhold Defiled, they pretty much feel like they were used as a means to an end, and for a moment they threaten to kill Wanda, but she lets them know if they kill her, then all that'll do is free Chthon again. But from here, Wanda ends up sending everybody back from Otherrealm, while also rewriting the Darkhold's influence on the heroes in order to change them back to the regular form. But also with doing this, at Black Bolt's request, she made sure to leave them with the memories of what happened in each of their stories so that they'd always have the knowledge or the memory of what could be. But aside from these guys coming back, we also gotta talk about the Wanderer or the Stranger who had made his way back from Otherrealm as well. And it's here we find out that this is James Michael Starling, Omega the Unknown, who is a character that has been missing for quite some time. But just to give a brief rundown of who James Michael Starling is, writer Steve Gerber, who created him in the mid-70s, he created Omega the Unknown because he wanted to do a story based around a real 12-year-old who wasn't magically transformed into an adult and also wasn't a sidekick that was changed into a mainstay because a trapeze broke. Yeah, shots were fired back then. But for James Michael, he's the last in the series of artificial beings that hailed from the planet Protaris, to where they would then collect data from other planets and pass that data to the newer model. And for James Michael, he didn't really know of his history until he was 12 years old, and his parents, who were androids, were fatally damaged in a car accident. But there was this in addition to him running into the previous model, X3Z, who had passed on to James Michael the power of harnessing biospheric energy, as well as kinetic energy blasts, which burned Omega symbols into James Michael's palms, which I believe was also like the first time that he had experienced pain. But with him returning now and being reunited with a portion of his mother, they've reunited in his hometown of Pennsylvania, to where here she's gonna catch him up with what he's missed over the past decades. And I'm kinda curious to see where that goes. But aside from this, we then head over to upstate New York, to where we find Doom has a few choice words for Wanda, cause he definitely wants to talk about what just happened over in Otherrealm, with her breaking her agreement, deviating from the plan, setting him on fire, because he feels some type of way about all of it. But Wanda lets him know that she knew that he was gonna make this whole thing all about him, like he always does. And as Wanda exposes that she's aware that Doom isn't even here for this discussion, and she just tears apart the Doombot while pointing out that Victor hasn't changed, because his ego is one of his few weaknesses, and even after all these years he still thinks he's better than Wanda. But this pretty much begins a new chapter for Wanda, or she would call it a new page 1. But even with this being a new start for her, and her pretty much pulling a Chthon on Chthon, I can't help but think that eventually this is gonna turn out to be something really bad. Because for one, with us getting all those different Darkhold stories for the different members of the Darkhold Defiled, we kind of also got a story for Wanda that we saw in Darkhold Alpha, when she had her dream of Chthon being freed and chaos just breaking out across the globe. And with thinking back on this, I'd kind of like to see a standalone Darkhold issue for Wanda, which I'd kind of imagine playing out one of 3 ways, with the first being a continuation of that dream, and the second idea being a Darkhold story that was based on Doom being prepared for Wanda, and instead he actually succeeded at merging with the Darkhold and absorbing Chthon, which would then be pretty nuts just to see what he would do with that power. But then also third and finally, a Darkhold story where this all goes left for Wanda, because with the Darkhold basically being designed as a tool to create a passage for Chthon to return to this world, how crazy would it be for that to still happen with Wanda now being the true Darkhold, to where it would then have Doom somewhere at the end of the story like, I told you so, or just somewhere watching it all fall apart, telling himself it should have been me. But who knows, we may get something like that, we may not, only time will tell. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support, and for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.